So hello everyone, and welcome to the SailPoint session, which is part of the Bytes Security Horizons 2020 virtual conference. My name's Mark Oldroyd. I'm one of the Partner Enablement Managers across EMEA with SailPoint. And what we're going to do today is talk about a concept we call the Identity Cube and how you can help to future-proof your business using this concept of identity information and identity governance. So if we take a look at the world in which we live in, you can see the world is changing significantly. First of all, the resources and the compute environments available to us right now are very different. Over the last 10 years, it's been about managing our on-premise applications, mobile applications, and lately our cloud-based services. Today, organizations must protect access not only to on-premise apps, but also mobile devices, mobile applications, cloud solutions, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and edge devices or things, as well as the computing instances that are enabling edge computing. Secondly, there are more regulations and frameworks that are controlling what we do as an organization. The net result of an increased threat landscape is clearly the increased regulation and control that organizations have to comply with. And thirdly, or finally, we no longer manage just employees' identities within our organizations. And we need to understand and manage many different types of users today. We need to manage partners, customers, machines, even things. And we have technologies like RPA becoming prevalent, and managing the associated identities from RPA forms a significant part of our security approach. And we'll come back to that a little bit later on when we talk about the role of identity governance and administration in organizations today. What you can see from this diagram is that the extremes of these axes are beginning to describe something that the market has termed hyper-automation. And again, we'll touch on that a little bit later as we go through. So let's begin at the end of this story. And what you hopefully will realize by the end of this presentation is that this concept that we call the Identity Cube actually represents the security perimeter in current times. And what you'll hopefully begin to understand is how powerful the concept of the Identity Cube can be for an organization. Gaining comprehensive, up-to-date visibility of the access that users have across your entire IT application, infrastructure, cloud services, your collaborative data stores, and even your infrastructure and security components, and combining this with business context information that we hold provides a compelling foundation for managing both your risk posture across the organization and also supporting business and technical initiatives that companies need to comply with. But first, let's touch on the problem of security. According to research, over 27 billion records have been exposed globally between January 1st, 2020 and June 30th, 2020, so the last half year. What does that mean to a typical organization? Well, in 2019, organizations suffered breaches on average just over 25,000 customer records, as you can see on the slide there. On average, it took around 279 days to identify and contain those breaches. And the typical impact on an organization financially, as you can see, based on the Ponemon Institute's cost per breached record of $150, the average cost of a breach in 2019 was $3.92 million in costs. That's after investigations, damage control, reports, repairs, lawsuits, fines. This is a huge cost burden to businesses. And if you look at the root cause of these breaches, you find that around 25% of those can be directly attributed to human error, which includes the inadvertent sharing of sensitive data and accounts being compromised through phishing attacks, for example. The amount of data we store on and off-premise is also increasing exponentially. And that, coupled with the changes in the way we all work today and the future way that we're going to be working, is actually making the job of protecting our data more and more difficult. And this is a big problem to organizations, and it's only getting bigger. So let's think about what is happening right now in addition to that cyber situation, some of the general IT and business trends that we're seeing around the world. And today's organizations have to deal with constant challenges from both the business world and the technology worlds. And many of you will be well aware of these challenges and could even be in the process of delivering some of these programs. Some of them may be related to the changing relationships we see with customers and our peers and markets and the workforce. Others could be enhancing our protection against cyber threats, as we've seen, and potentially managing the huge volume of incidents and alerts that are typically generated. Others, like digital or cloud transformations, are becoming commonplace as more of us take advantage of these new technologies delivered from the cloud. And then some, as we've touched on earlier, like hyper-automation, right at the bottom of the screen there, can actually have a huge impact on the way our business and technology operations occur within organizations. And they actually require a shift in our thinking. And again, we'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through this. Other challenges have reared their head quite recently, such as the need to quickly move the majority of the workforce out of the office into the home working environment, and retain the level of security that we expect in those environments. So lots of things going on in terms of the business initiatives and business programs we have to support. All of these business and technology challenges really result in constantly changing IT environments. And it's something that most of us are very used to seeing. The typical result of business change is that we add more technology to the infrastructure, okay, over and above what is already there. And we see older applications, eventually or constantly being refreshed and replaced, likely with new cloud-based technologies. And these new technologies could be application platforms such as things like ServiceNow and Salesforce, or they could be more complex cloud-based infrastructure platforms such as AWS or Google Cloud Platform. Not only do these need to be governed and managed, but very importantly, organizations need to be able to quickly and efficiently bring these platforms into production. So let's add back in all the things that we've just been talking about, that we highlighted earlier, and think about the impact of all of this on the risk level and the security profile of our organization. But given all that's happening in today's organizations and the rate of change required to keep pace with our competitors, how can we quickly adapt and bring on this new technology and these platforms and services that we need, but still retain the high level of security and protection that we desire? Well, the answer lies in the identity cube concept that we've mentioned several times already. Understanding the evolving user populations, the access they hold, the services that are available, and what users need as a minimum and maximum to perform their job function gives us a foundation for managing this change and adapting quickly while retaining control and reducing the potential risk to the information in the organization. And that might sound straightforward, but where do we start? How do we start our journey to both address the business challenges and at the same time manage the potential risk brought about through all this technological change? Well, we can use identity governance and the concept of the identity cube to help us. But first, let's go back to some basics. Identity governance is all about helping organizations tackle some critical questions. Firstly, where is the sensitive data in our organization? Let's start by understanding where we store the most critical and valuable information that drives the business. What kind of data do we hold? How is it proliferating? How is it being shared inside and outside the organization? And secondly, let's understand who currently has access. Now, this is a complex question. Who are the users within our organization? What is their relationship to the business? Which applications and services can they access right now? And what rights and privileges and entitlements and group memberships do they hold in those applications? And last but not least, what access do these people have to sensitive data? And once we can answer that complex question, we begin to build our set of identity cubes. And we can start to then test whether or not this access that these users have is appropriate for their job function and for their relationship with the business. And for this, we need a selection of tools and approaches which are aimed primarily at getting the business users themselves involved in the decision-making process of what is appropriate. Ultimately, this is about ensuring users have only the access they need for their job function at that point in time. Another concept that we call least privilege. And finally, we want to know that the access these people hold is actually being used correctly in accordance with their expected job function. Any deviation from this might indicate a situation of inappropriate access, malicious intent, or even perhaps a data breach in action. The job of the Identity Cube is to represent all of this information and activity in a way that we can easily consume to support these initiatives. And again, that sounds pretty straightforward, but actually how do we do all of this? How do we address those questions? Well, we must go through a fairly intensive process in order to get to full maturity, but we can start simply by understanding our user population better. Constructing the repository of identity cubes really begins with this basic discovery process. Identity information related to our user communities is already resident in our HR or HCM systems and perhaps other repositories within the organization. Extracting elements of that data for each person, using it to construct the initial face of our cube, and then putting in place synchronization practices and processes to keep that information updated gives us the first identity deliverable. And even at this stage, we may face challenges such as finding a source of authoritative information for temporary or contract workers perhaps. But there are approaches that we can use to formalize this and really get control of the situation and of these communities of users. The result is the beginning of our Identity Cube repository. So once we have the basic cubes in place, we begin to enhance this content by aggregating the accounts and the permissions held by our users across the entire set of IT applications and services. This involves building connections, collecting access data, and correlating this back into the individual cubes and slowly building up a picture of user access. During this process, we already start to see benefits from cleaning out unused orphan accounts and unnecessary access. Connectivity here is key to this working. You need a solution that's capable of dealing with all the legacy and the new technologies in your environment and everything that we're going to see in the future as it evolves. Another face of the cube involves understanding the data that the user has access to, as well as the applications. Analyzing collaborative storage solutions such as OneDrive or regular server-based storage will not only show us what users have access to, but it will also highlight the locations of sensitive or critical content that needs to be protected. And finally, augmenting the cube with security-related access controls adds another angle to the information that we hold. Access to things like privileged account management solutions, the contents of single sign-on launchpads, administrative rights, and bot or RPA account ownership, as we discussed earlier, are all linked into the cube structure to give us a comprehensive view of user access across the entire estate. What we now have is visibility of our user access across this entire landscape, which is a foundation for governance. Once this is in place, we can use the identity cubes to then directly address the questions we discussed earlier. Where is your sensitive data? Who currently has access? Is the access appropriate? And how is the access being used? Once the Identity Cube repository is defined and built, we have an effective platform on which to construct our risk reduction and governance frameworks. And this is what SailPoint is well known for. Simply analysing the data or going one step further and asking our business community to assess and judge what we found allows us to quickly move towards a more refined and appropriate access model for all of our users. Applying things like near real-time policies based on toxic combinations of access or patterns of activity allows us to quickly identify and remediate inappropriate access that increases our risk posture. Tagging and monitoring the most critical and sensitive data and monitoring who has access to it, wherever it's located, again helps to reduce the potential risk of malicious or accidental exposure. And at the same time, let's not forget the potential increase in our administrative efficiency and the productivity of the organisation once we start to automate the provisioning of access for new starters, adjusting appropriate access as a user changes their job function and moves around the organisation, and handling termination of leaver access through business role modelling and other mechanisms. Password self-service reset mechanisms allow staff to quickly restore access without expensive and time-consuming interaction with the help desk. And the Identity Cube is again able to support these processes because it represents a comprehensive view of user access, the appropriateness, and of course business context information. SailPoint has been very successful in delivering these industry-leading solutions to help our customers experience these governance and efficiency benefits, and is able to offer more detailed evaluations and benefits that are possible to individual organizations. However, customers today can choose different delivery models for these SailPoint solutions, really to suit your your technology aspirations. But let's think about the Identity Cube repository that we just discussed. At first glance, we build those cubes. They may all look pretty much the same, basically the same content, and represent very similar information. It can actually be quite difficult to perceive the risk represented by the user population when you're faced with large repositories of these seemingly very comparable cubes. Just as traditional approaches to IT security treat all users the same, governance solutions can also apply the same policies and restrictions across the board, and this leads to a lack of focus. Your governance processes may miss something significant and may lead to an increased risk for the organisation for all the reasons we've already talked about. A truly intelligent governance framework can keep a watchful eye trained on this user population. But let's look closer. Let's take a closer look at those users. Perhaps they're not the same. Perhaps they have slight variations in the access based on factors such as geography or job title or even the markets that they operate in. And you will find that there are some users in the community who have the potential to impact the organization's risk profile, perhaps in a very small way, maybe in a very significant way. Maybe there are users that have conflicting access combinations, highly toxic combinations of access that open up the potential for insider fraud or insider threat. Perhaps there are users who show a slightly elevated potential for risk due to their strange activity patterns. If we apply some advanced AI techniques, artificial intelligence techniques, then we may start to understand and manage these users in a much better way. Peer grouping is something that we use to allow us to identify collections of cubes that have similar characteristics or similar entitlements and access, but more importantly, similar levels of risk. As changes happen, these groups are continuously analysed and re-evaluated. Ultimately, these peer groups will be used to define dynamic business roles and minimise the risk through better understanding of their behaviour. Using such approaches, it becomes easier to find the needle in a haystack, those people with unique or odd access rights and behaviours. These individual identities are called outliers, and they represent the highest potential to risk in our organisation. We can deal with these people accordingly through increased attention and additional controls. And this is taking the governance of our users, our applications and our data to the next level, allowing the organisation to face the challenges we discussed earlier with minimum impact on the risk posture and maximum impact on the business capability. We know that this kind of approach is not being used today, because the cost of data breaches and the amount of data breaches businesses are facing is evidence that it's not. And additionally, humans cannot achieve this at the speed and scale that it needs to happen. We need to harness the latest artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to give us the capability to do this, and SailPoint is again leading the field in this. Let's go back to some of those business and technical challenges that I highlighted earlier and see what we can do to support them. A challenge that many organizations are facing is managing and effectively processing the huge and growing amount of security incidents that are captured by the SOC, or Security Operations Center. It is becoming increasingly difficult to sort through all of these events to really identify the true problem areas. And again, the identity cube concept can help here too. When a true anomaly is detected, current security operations usually result in some sort of alert or notification being sent out. Just think about the benefits of enriching those security alerts with business context information from the cube to help better detect the anomalies, or the true anomalies. Simple things like where a user is located, the job function, or the role explanation would help to remove some false positives and validate the activities a little further. What if we could also use the identity cube to perform active remediation? For example, disabling all the accounts that are held by a user as a result of a detected breach, or triggering an access certification for a user's entire access profile as a result of some inappropriate behavior that we've spotted out of hours. Using identity information, it's possible to increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of our security operations. The cube, again, can quickly become a critical element of the cybersecurity framework to protect the new perimeter, both efficiently and effectively. Next, let's focus on one of the trends I mentioned at the start of this presentation, namely something called hyper-automation. Now this is, if you haven't seen it, this is fast becoming known as the fourth industrial revolution. And it's not just about the automation of simple business tasks. Gartner, for example, talks about hyper-automation as the end-to-end automation of business processes enhanced with artificial intelligence and machine learning. It even encompasses the potential for human augmentation to assist with the delivery of business processes. Over the past few years, we've seen a huge wave of adoption for process automation, and things like RPA and the use of software bots have become more and more prevalent. And the impact, or the potential impact, of bots being used without appropriate identity governance is now significant. Businesses should ask the right questions of their organization and be on the lookout for automation programs that may be, for example, creating bots ad hoc. Being ahead of the curve is really key to ensuring identity governance standards are met in the rush for these early technologies. And as these bot-based initiatives rise, businesses can pave the way to success by using models that have already been proven. Most often, this will mean treating bots in the same manner as our contractor identities. Just like contractors today, this will require the establishment of a sub-repository of identity cubes dedicated to managing bots. We must also consider things like time-based access and the application of policies to ensure tight restrictions on the capabilities of these bots within the environment. Any access to privileged information has to be restricted through appropriate separation of duty policies, and any use of privileged accounts, for example, must be performed through governable channels, such as a dedicated privileged access management solution. Because their actions should be strictly within set boundaries, analytics can also be deployed to identify if bot activity includes anything outside of its originally intended function. Additionally, human oversight of bots is key to good governance, and really means that every bot, every software bot, every RPA user, like a contractor, must have a real-world person who is ultimately responsible for their governance. And this is a real-life application of inter-cube relationships. Again, something we've supported for some time now. Let's take another topic, the topic of the Agile Workforce, again mentioned earlier. As an example, The recent switch to home working has resulted in many organizations deploying huge amounts of technology very quickly, often delivered as cloud services due to speed and cost. And much of this technology was actually delivered without perhaps the typical security considerations that we normally apply. And most organizations in some way did cut corners in the race for speed over perfection. In user access terms, perhaps we didn't approve or validate what represented correct user access at the time. Some organizations even removed the approval process completely for access requests, just to get things moving quickly and get their workers supported in remote environments. And as we know, supporting large numbers of remote workers and changing the way the organization operates doesn't have to compromise the security procedures. New cloud-based technologies such as collaboration tools like Zoom or Teams can again be quickly rolled out simply by onboarding them into the governance solution, adding the appropriate access rights to existing role structures, and pretty much letting the automated governance processes generate the accounts and the access levels relevant to each user. Working from home, to reset a forgotten password or perhaps request access to a new application should not require calls to the help desk or any kind of visit to site. And SailPoint saw some of these challenges in action. One of our customers, which was actually a global advisory firm who we work with, very quickly enabled over 220,000 employees with access to collaborative solutions simply by doing this very quickly, powered by their SailPoint solution. While we're talking about remote access and managing remote workers and the Agile enterprise, I just wanted to highlight a few specific areas where SailPoint has capabilities that are directly relevant to this webinar today. Recently, we added a whole new contractor management mechanism into our SaaS solution, something that we call the Non-Employee Lifecycle Management, or NELM for short. Now, NELM has enabled fast onboarding and offboarding of temporary staff and collaborative workers, which are typically not recorded in your authoritative HR systems. It also provides delegated control to business owners to support fast response to changing user requirements and staff organization. I mentioned the fact that many companies recently scrambled to enable remote workers and get them the access they needed quickly to continue to work from home. The result of that is that when it comes to security checking and validation of access requests, we may have missed some things. Many companies are now wondering how we can get back control and fix any potential security risks that arose from that action. And certification or access review of user access or potentially all access or a focused set of access rights is primarily one of the tools that we would use to do this. Being able to quickly define certification targets, schedule repeating certification campaigns, and rapidly implement the findings, in other words, revoking unnecessary access, is really critical to getting back the control and reducing the risk while enabling our remote workers to continue to operate effectively within this new environment. And lastly, in this current situation and the race to build the Agile Workforce, there are some key components that nearly all organizations have deployed or perhaps are still looking to deploy. The use of collaborative tools has increased exponentially. And again, I mentioned this on the previous slide. SailPoint has recognized this early and made sure that we had the connectivity in our solutions to support what customers were looking to do. New cloud-based technologies such as Slack, Zoom and Teams can be quickly rolled out, as we said, simply by onboarding them into the governance solution and plugging them into existing role models. And going back to the IT programs and business programs, the last topic we're going to touch on today is another major initiative in almost every organization, and that's around digital or cloud transformation. The cloud is a complex environment and organizations are struggling with how to secure it. It's not just about securing employee access, but it's also machines, bots and other objects, as we've seen. Cloud transformations can be subdivided into the adoption of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and also SaaS or software as a service solutions. Infrastructure as a service and platform as a service are very complex, and globally we know that around 84% of organizations are actually moving their workloads from on-premise into these cloud-based platforms, and the primary players in that market are obviously AWS, Azure and GCP. And what's more interesting is that globally 78% of those organizations using these platforms actually end up with more than one platform in their organization. But if we move on from the platform discussion, what we also have are large-scale adoption of SaaS services, such as Office 365, ServiceNow, Salesforce, Workday, and of course SAP S/4HANA. And the migration from on-premise applications to these cloud-based services is really becoming mandatory for most organizations if they want to remain competitive and supported with their technology. And again, as we know, these are big, expensive projects, typically involving the transition of user access, the cleanup of access rights, the planning of new role structures, and many other identity-related tasks. Again, having a governance system in place with a repository of identity cubes that defines the users, their relationship with the company, and the access they currently hold will greatly help these transitions. Automated provisioning processes, role mining tools and role governance tools, and fast onboarding of applications into the governance solution will all help to speed up and simplify a secure move to the cloud. So SailPoint really believes that identity should be at the heart of an organization's IT and business strategy to maintain effective governance, reduce risk, and protect against accidental information exposure. However, identity also has a part to play in addressing the broader security, risk, and compliance requirements of an organization. Why not integrate this identity and knowledge with your IT applications, your services, your security infrastructure components, so that they can all benefit from the identity cube? Typically, many of the security solutions become silos, operating and managed by different organizations with very different focuses. And this is where identity can help. By sharing identity cubes across these security silos, we can enhance our effectiveness. If we can give each one of these security areas a common understanding of who the users are, who should have access, who does have access, and how they should be using it, that will break down the silos and make the whole security proposition much more effective. So we come back to the diagram that we used at the beginning where I talked about the changing landscape. The requirements for IGA, Identity Governance and Administration, are expanding on these same three axes, driving us to think about and apply new approaches to governance. And the types and volumes of identities that we talked about are increasing. The control we have over the compute power and the location of that compute power is diminishing. The data center that we could once control is now very much distributed. And finally, the frameworks we traditionally used for measurement and control are changing. IGA systems developed over the past 10 years or so have focused on this area, the protection of finite, centralized applications and focused business controls. They have been created for specific use cases. Clients are now facing these new challenges which call for different IGA approaches, including the application of new technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, really to be able to cope with the changing environments that we see. In such a world, identity really is the new perimeter, as client environments are so distributed with huge volumes of identities and many different processes that traditional security models begin to break down. So the things we've talked about today, these are all mechanisms that can be quickly applied once we have the identity cube repository and that concept of the cube in place. SailPoint has been developing and driving the vision for this with the introduction of governance solutions as far back as 2007. We revolutionized the provisioning market in 2010, introduced SaaS-based identity governance a few years later, and finally we added data access management as part of a comprehensive governance strategy. And to continue to push the boundaries of what is possible, we're once again advancing the market into this new world of artificial intelligence and machine learning based identity. This is what SailPoint calls predictive identity, which is a service-based approach with many focus capabilities to address many of the challenges that we've highlighted today. And that really concludes the presentation today. Thank you very much for attending and for listening. I hope the session was informative for you. I would also like to invite you to join SailPoint at the virtual stand that we have at the conference, and also there is a dedicated identity chat session running in the networking lounge immediately after this session. Should be around 20 past 3. But thanks again for attending, and have a great day.